The dust of Chiron whipped across the open court, stinging Leonara Sierra's eyes as she crawled forward on her knees. The metallic grit embedded itself in her palms and knees, drawing blood with each movement. Around her, the black stone architecture of Urdan's public court loomed like ancient monoliths, casting long shadows across the square where hundreds had gathered to witness her humiliation. Leonara kept her head down, her tinted purple-blue skin exposed to the harsh elements and harsher stares. Her long hair, the color of midnight ocean, provided the only shield against the crowd's prying eyes. The overseer stood at the edge of the square, red cloak billowing, his metallic staff of office catching the light of the three suns overhead. "Crawl! Aryan filth!" he commanded, his voice amplified by the hovering hollow speakers. "Show Urdan what becomes of those who challenge the governance council." The crowd roared in approval. They always did. The cleansing ritual was as much entertainment as it was justice in the post-interstellar war society of Chiron. In the 22nd century, humanity had conquered the stars, but retained its appetite for cruelty. Leonara bit back tears as she inched toward the finish line, a glowing red marker at the far end of the square. 7 years ago, she had watched her family executed in this same square. Now, at 20, she was the nameless prisoner, the latest spectacle in Urdan's theater of punishment. As she approached the final section, something changed in the crowd. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Through the curtain of her hair, Leonara glimpsed movement, someone breaking protocol. A man leaped over the security barrier, pushing past the startled guards. He wore no uniform, just worn leather clothes that marked him as a commoner. Most striking was the ancient sword he carried, a relic in an age of energy weapons. "Stop!" His voice cut through the crowd's chatter like the blade he carried. With a decisive motion, he threw his sword to the ground and strode directly toward Leonara. The overseer's face contorted with rage. "Seize him! He violates the sacred ritual!" Guards in energy armor activated their weapons, casting an eerie blue glow across the square. But the man moved faster than they anticipated. In 3 strides, he reached Leonara, and without hesitation, he bent down and lifted her into his arms. The crowd fell silent. No one had ever interrupted a cleansing ritual. It was unthinkable. "What is your name?" he whispered to her as guards closed in. Through cracked lips, she managed, "Leonara." He nodded once, then turned to face the approaching guards. "My name is Nick Velton," he announced loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "And this ends today." With Leonara clutched against his chest, Nick snatched up his sword and bolted toward the eastern exit. The guards fired energy blasts that sizzled past them, scorching the ancient stonework. Nick zigzagged through the narrow alleys of Urdan, his footsteps sure despite the extra weight he carried. "Hold tight," he muttered as they reached a decrepit hovercart at the edge of the square. He placed her gently in the back, covering her with a rough blanket before jumping into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered to life, and they lurched forward just as the first guards rounded the corner. They sped through the narrow streets of Urdan, dust and debris flying in their wake. Leonara clutched the blanket around her shoulders, her mind racing faster than the cart. Why would anyone risk their life for her? What did this stranger want? "We're heading for the old strata tunnels," Nick called over his shoulder as they veered sharply down a steep incline. "The governance can't track us there. Too much interference from the old mining equipment." Leonara nodded weakly, though he couldn't see her. The adrenaline that had kept her conscious during the ritual was fading, leaving only pain and exhaustion in its wake. The cart skidded to a halt at what appeared to be a dead end. A wall of rusted metal partially collapsed into a pile of debris. Nick jumped out, lifted Leonara again, and carried her toward what seemed to be solid rock. Only when they were nearly upon it did she see the narrow opening, barely wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. "It's going to be tight," Nick warned. setting her down briefly to push aside some loose stones. But it's the only way into the tunnels without passing a checkpoint. Inside, the air was damp and heavy with the smell of rust and stagnant water. Nick produced a small light that cast long shadows down the tunnel ahead. He led her deeper into the labyrinth of abandoned mining shafts, supporting her when her legs threatened to give out. Finally, they reached a small chamber where the tunnel widened. Ancient mining equipment lay scattered about, repurposed into crude furniture. Nick helped Leonara to sit on what might once have been part of a drilling apparatus. "Here," he said, handing her a container of water and a set of rough clothes. "It's not much, but it's clean." She took them silently, eyeing him with suspicion, even as she desperately needed what he offered. When he turned his back to give her privacy, she quickly dressed, wincing as the fabric brushed against her raw skin. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you intervene?" Nick turned back to face her, his expression somber. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch. Not again." "Again?" Leonara's breath caught. "You've seen this before?" 7 years ago. His eyes fixed on hers. A family was executed in the public court. Their daughter was forced to watch before being subjected to the same ritual you endured today. I was there, 16 years old, doing nothing but push-ups in my barracks, watching it happen. His fist clenched at the memory. I swore if I ever saw such injustice again, I wouldn't remain silent. Leonara's heart pounded. "That family, they were Aryans, like me." Nick nodded. "The last of the elite bloodline, they said. Except they missed one." His eyes bore into hers. "You—" Memories flooded back, her parents' faces as they were led to the execution platform. Her little brother crying, the feeling of hands holding her back as she screamed. Then her own humiliation as they stripped her and forced her to crawl across the same square where her family's blood still stained the stones. "I survived," she whispered. "But I was nobody after that, just another orphan in the underlevels. Until today, when they found you again." Nick crouched before her. "What happened? Why did they bring you back for another cleansing?" Leonara's lips tightened. "I don't know. I was scavenging in the eastern ruins when patrol units surrounded me. They scanned my bioprint and suddenly went silent. Next thing I knew, I was being dragged to the public court." Nick was about to respond when a metallic clinking echoed down the tunnel. He was on his feet instantly, sword drawn. "Yurik," he called softly. "Is that you?" The clinking grew louder until a spherical droid rolled into view. It was about the size of a human head, its surface a patchwork of different metals and composites. A single blue sensor light rotated around its circumference, blinking rapidly when it spotted Nick. Voice pattern confirmed. "Nick Velton." It buzzed in a synthesized voice. "New biological entity detected. Scanning. Female. Aryan subspecies. Approximately 20 standard years." "She's with me, Yurik," Nick said, relaxing slightly. "This is Leonara." The droid rolled closer, its sensor light dimming to a less aggressive brightness. "Greetings, Leonara. I am Yurik, repurposed security droid and current guide to Nick Velton, who is occasionally foolish, but generally well-intentioned." Despite everything, Leonara found herself smiling faintly at the droid's characterization. "Any signs of pursuit?" Nick asked. "Affirmative. Energy signatures consistent with governance patrol units detected in upper tunnel network. Estimated time to current location, 17 minutes. Nick cursed under his breath. "We need to move deeper. Yurik, what's the status of the Black Sphere outpost?" Last communication indicated operational status at the Old Forge, approximately 3 kilometers through the lower tunnels. Leonara looked between them. "Black Sphere? The resistance movement?" Nick nodded grimly. "They're our only hope now. I've been feeding them information for years, but I've never actually sought sanctuary with them." He extended his hand to help her up. Think you can walk 3 kilometers? Leonara took his hand and pulled herself to her feet, ignoring the protest of her abused muscles. I've endured worse today. Lead the way. They set off deeper into the tunnels, Yurik rolling ahead to scout the path. As they walked, Nick explained more about his background. He had been a commando in the interplanetary forces before being discharged for refusing to fire on unarmed colonists during the suppression of the Meridian Uprising. Since then, he'd been surviving on the fringes of Erdon society, prohibited from carrying energy weapons as all civilians were, but clinging to his ancient sword, a family heirloom from Earth that predated space colonization. The blade can't be traced or deactivated like energy weapons, he explained, as they navigated a particularly narrow passage. It's considered primitive, but that's its advantage. Leonara listened, gradually piecing together a picture of her unlikely rescuer. And what do you know of me? Of Aryans? Nick's pace slowed slightly. Only what most people know. The Aryan elite were genetically modified colonists who settled Chiron centuries ago. They adapted to the planet's high radiation and developed distinctive traits: your skin coloration, enhanced cellular regeneration, resistance to toxins. But during the Interstellar War, they were branded as separatists and systematically eliminated. That's the official story, Leonara said softly. The truth is more complicated. Before she could elaborate, Yurik rolled back rapidly, his sensor light flashing red. Alert! Governance units detected ahead. 2 energy-armored guards patrolling the junction. Nick drew his sword, the ancient metal gleaming dully in the low light. Stay back, he instructed Leonara. If things go badly, follow Yurik. He knows alternative routes to the old forge. Without waiting for a response, he crept forward to the bend in the tunnel. Leonara could see the faint blue glow of energy weapons reflecting off the damp walls. Nick took a deep breath, then launched himself around the corner. What followed was unlike anything Leonara had ever seen. Nick moved with inhuman speed and precision, his ancient blade a blur of motion. The guards fired their energy weapons, but Nick somehow anticipated each shot, twisting his body out of the way while closing the distance. The first guard went down with a single slice across his armor's power junction. The second managed to fire a wild shot that grazed Nick's shoulder before the sword found the weak point in his helmet seal. In seconds, it was over. 2 of Governance's elite guards lay unconscious or dead, their advanced armor rendered useless by precision strikes from a weapon they had dismissed as obsolete. Nick turned back to Leonara, his breathing heavy but controlled. A burn mark smoldered on his leather jacket where the energy blast had grazed him. You're hurt, she said, stepping forward. He shook his head. It's nothing. We need to keep moving before reinforcements arrive. But Leonara had already reached him. Without asking permission, she placed her hand over his wound. Nick winced, then stared in amazement as a faint, violet glow emanated from her palm. When she removed her hand, the burn had faded to a mild redness. How did you... Aryan gift, she cut him off. My family's particular trait was accelerated healing. It's stronger when used on others than on myself. Ironically, she flexed her fingers, which still bore the wounds from her crawl across the square. It's why they hunt us. Imagine armies of soldiers who could be healed instantly on the battlefield. Nick's expression darkened. Is that what this is about? They want to use your genetic material to create some kind of super soldiers? That's part of it, Leonara acknowledged as they resumed their journey, stepping carefully past the fallen guards. But there's more. My bloodline carries what they call the regeneration code, a specific genetic sequence that, if properly replicated, could theoretically grant near immortality. Nick whistled softly. No wonder the governance wants you. Wants me dead, Leonara corrected. Or at least under their complete control. The Aryan elite weren't exterminated because of separatism. That was just the excuse. They were eliminated because they refused to become biological assets for the governance's war machine. They continued deeper into the tunnels, the air growing heavier and the path less maintained. Several times they had to climb over collapsed sections or wade through shallow pools of stagnant water. Throughout it all, Leonara kept pace, her determination evident in every step despite her earlier ordeal. After what felt like hours, Urich's sensor light changed to a steady green. Proximity alert. Black sphere perimeter detected. Authentication protocols initiating. The droid projected a series of complex patterns onto the tunnel wall, symbols that shifted and transformed every few seconds. From somewhere ahead, corresponding patterns flashed in response. Authentication successful, Urich announced. Proceed to entry point Alpha. The entry point turned out to be a massive steel door set into the rock face, disguised to look like part of the natural tunnel wall. It slid open silently as they approached, revealing a vast, open space beyond. The old forge stretched before them, once Karen's primary manufacturing facility, now abandoned by the governance but repurposed by the resistance. Enormous rusted machinery created a labyrinth within the cavernous space. Makeshift dwellings had been constructed in the shadows of ancient assembly lines. People moved purposefully among them, carrying supplies or weapons or technical equipment. As Nick and Leonara stepped through the doorway, a small, welcoming committee approached. At their center was a woman whose very presence commanded attention, tall and regal, with close-cropped silver hair despite her relatively young face. She carried herself with unmistakable authority, her eyes, sharp and assessing, fixed immediately on Leonara. "You've brought us quite the prize." "Velton," she said, her voice cultured but hard. "Though I'm not sure if it's a gift or a curse." Nick inclined his head slightly. "Judge Thorne, or do you prefer Alyssa now that you've abandoned your governance title?" A tight smile played at the woman's lips. "Alyssa will do. The governance stripped me of my judgeship when I refused to sentence children to death for their parents' supposed crimes." Her gaze returned to Leonara. "Though I suspect they regret that decision now that I lead the largest resistance cell on Karen." She stepped closer to Leonara, studying her with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "We know who you are, Leonara Sira, last surviving daughter of House Sira, one of the 7 original Aryan families, carrier of the regeneration code." Leonara stiffened. "How do you know this?" "Because I was the one who helped hide you 7 years ago," Alyssa replied. "Before I broke with the governance, I ensured you disappeared into the underlevels. I had hoped you would remain hidden until we were ready to strike." Her expression hardened. "But it seems the governance's genetic screening protocols have improved." Nick looked between them, confusion evident. "You knew about her all along?" Alyssa nodded. "The Resistance has been protecting certain Aryan survivors for years, those with genetic sequences valuable enough that the governance would either weaponize them or destroy them. Leonara's sequence is perhaps the most valuable of all." She turned and gestured for them to follow. "Come. We have much to discuss, and these tunnels have ears, even here." They were led deeper into the old forge, through a maze of repurposed machinery and makeshift barriers. Finally, they entered what appeared to be a command center, a circular room filled with screens and communication equipment, staffed by people of various ages and apparent backgrounds. Alyssa dismissed most of the personnel with a gesture, leaving only a few key lieutenants. Once the room had cleared, she activated a holographic display in the center of the space. "The Governance Council has been developing a program called Phoenix Protocol," she began, without preamble. "Its goal is to create a legion of genetically modified super soldiers using Aryan DNA as a foundation. These soldiers would be virtually unkillable, wounds healing instantly, diseases ineffective, even aging dramatically slowed." The hologram showed laboratory footage of experiments, failed attempts that resulted in grotesque mutations. Leonara turned away, unable to watch. They've been unsuccessful so far, Alyssa continued, because they lack the complete regeneration code. Parts of it were lost when they executed the Aryan families. But now, with you, she looked directly at Leonara. You carry the complete sequence. If they capture you again, they'll extract it and finally succeed. Then why not kill me? Leonara asked bluntly. If I'm such a danger, why risk keeping me alive? Nick stepped forward protectively, but Alyssa raised a hand to forestall his objection. Because the regeneration code could also be our salvation, she said. Not as a weapon, but as a shield. Imagine medical technology that could heal any wound, cure any disease. The Aryan gifts were never meant for war. They were evolutionary adaptations to survive on this harsh planet. She deactivated the hologram and leaned forward, hands braced on the central console. We don't want to exploit you, Leonara. We want to protect you until we can overthrow the governance and ensure your genetic heritage is used for healing, not destruction. Nick had remained silent during this exchange, but now he spoke up. You mentioned the Phoenix Protocol. I've heard rumors about it during my time in the Commandos. There was a commander, Darian Cruz, who spoke of it as if it were some kind of holy grail. Alyssa's expression darkened. Darian Cruz is now High Commander of all governance forces. He's the primary architect of the Phoenix Protocol, and will stop at nothing to acquire Leonara. And what's your plan? Nick pressed. Hide her here until the revolution succeeds? The governance is already tearing Erdan apart looking for her. It won't be long before they trace us here. Before Alyssa could respond, alarms blared throughout the complex. One of the lieutenants rushed back into the command center, face pale. Governance forces have breached the upper tunnels, he reported breathlessly. Energy tanks, at least 100 infantry units. They're moving systematically through all known resistance pathways. How? Alyssa demanded. Our counter-surveillance measures. They're tracking a specific biological signature, the lieutenant cut in, glancing at Leonara. They must have gotten a sample during the ritual. Leonara looked down at her hands, still bearing the wounds from her crawl across the square. Of course, her blood on the stones of the public court. Alyssa sprang into action, issuing rapid orders to defend the old forge. As resistance fighters rushed to battle stations, she turned back to Nick and Leonara. We have a contingency plan. There's an old mining shaft that leads to a secondary base in the radioactive wastelands. It's not ideal, but it's our best chance. Yurik knows the way. The spherical droid blinked its acknowledgement. I'll lead a diversionary attack on their forward position, Alyssa continued. That should buy you enough time to reach the shaft entrance. Through the walls of the command center, they could hear the distant sounds of energy weapons and explosions. The governance forces were getting closer. Nick turned to Leonara. Are you strong enough for this? She straightened her shoulders, determination flashing in her eyes. I was born on this harsh world, Nick Velton. A little more hardship won't break me. He smiled grimly, then looked to Alyssa. We'll make for the mining shaft, but know this, I'm not fighting just for your revolution. I'm fighting for her. Alyssa nodded once. Then we understand each other perfectly. Now go. They raced through the increasingly chaotic old forge, following Yurik's lead. Resistance fighters rushed past them in the opposite direction, weapons at the ready. The sounds of battle grew louder behind them. As they reached a narrow passage that Yurik indicated was the entrance to the mining shaft, the ceiling above them shuddered. Dust and small rocks rained down as the impact of energy tanks reverberated through the stone. Hurry, Yurik urged, his mechanical voice somehow conveying urgency. Structural integrity compromised. Tunnel collapse imminent. They had just entered the shaft when a massive explosion rocked the entire complex. The entrance behind them collapsed in a shower of rock and metal, sealing them inside, but also cutting off any pursuit. The mining shaft was narrow and descended at a steep angle. They moved as quickly as they dared in the dim light provided by Urich's sensor. After nearly an hour of careful progress, they emerged into a larger cavern that showed signs of previous habitation, abandoned equipment, the remnants of lighting systems, even crude beds carved into the rock walls. "Safe zone reached," Urich announced. "Radioactive levels minimal. Detection probability, less than 7%. Nick helped Leonara to one of the stone beds, then began checking the cavern for supplies. To his relief, he found emergency rations and water purifiers, standard resistance cache materials. As he returned with water and food, he found Leonara sitting with her head bowed, shoulders shaking slightly. It took him a moment to realize she was crying, silent tears tracking down her purple-blue cheeks. "Leonara?" He set down the supplies and knelt before her. "Are you injured?" She shook her head, wiping roughly at her tears. "I was just thinking about my family, about how they died to protect the same secret that's now endangering everyone who helps me." Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of grief and anger. "Is my genetic code really worth all this death?" Nick sat beside her on the stone bed. "That's not a fair question. The death isn't because of you. It's because of what the governance chooses to do with power. If they weren't exploiting your genetics, they'd be exploiting something else." "But why help me?" she pressed. "You threw away your life in Erdan. You've made yourself a target of the highest order. Is it because of what I am? Because of my genes?" The question hung between them, raw and demanding. Nick was silent for a long moment before answering. 7 years ago, I watched a family die. I watched a girl crawl across a square in humiliation while I did nothing but clench my fists and look away. His voice was low, intense. "Today, I saw you in that square, and something inside me broke. Not because of what you are, but because of who I wanted to be. Someone who doesn't stand by while atrocities happen." He looked directly into her eyes. "Your genes don't matter to me, Leonara. What matters is that you're a person who deserves dignity and life. Everything else is secondary." Leonara held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, not just my blood." They sat in silence for a while. The simple human connection, speaking more than words could. Eventually, Urich interrupted with an update. "Communication received from Black Sphere Network. Resistance forces have retreated to secondary positions. Casualties significant, but acceptable. Judge Thorne requests status confirmation." Nick activated a small communicator that Urich extended from a compartment in his spherical body. "We're secure in the mining shaft safe zone. Leonara is unharmed. What's the situation topside?" Alyssa's voice came through, distorted by interference but understandable. "Governance forces have occupied the old forge. They're conducting DNA sweeps of the entire area. We've initiated protocol blackout. All resistance cells going dark for 72 hours minimum." "And after that?" Nick asked. "We regroup and assess." There was a pause. Then Alyssa continued in a lower tone. "Nick, our intelligence suggests Darien Cruz himself is overseeing this operation. He's brought orbital assets, including the genetic control station in low Chiron orbit." Nick's expression hardened. "The satellite array that controls the Phoenix Protocol database. Yes, if we could somehow access that station, we could potentially corrupt or erase all their genetic research data. Set them back years, maybe permanently." Leonara leaned forward. "I could do it," she said urgently. "My genetic signature would grant access to their highest security protocols. I could get into systems that no one else could breach." "It's too dangerous," Nick objected immediately. "The station will be heavily guarded." "But not against me," Leonara countered. "They want me alive, remember? And they want my genetic material intact. They can't risk killing me or seriously injuring me." Alyssa's voice cut through their argument. She's right. Nick, this may be our only opportunity. While their forces are concentrated on the ground, their orbital security will be at its most vulnerable. And how exactly do we get to an orbital station? Nick demanded. In case you've forgotten, I pilot a hover cart, not a spacecraft. The Resistance has resources you haven't seen, Alyssa replied, including a modified atmospheric shuttle hidden in the radioactive wastelands. Urich has the coordinates. It's risky, but it's our best chance to strike a decisive blow. The communication ended, leaving them with a momentous decision. Nick paced the small cavern, clearly torn between protecting Leonara and seizing the strategic opportunity. It's not your choice to make, Leonara said quietly. It's mine, and I choose to fight. Nick stopped pacing and looked at her. Really looked at her. No longer the broken victim he'd rescued from the public court, but a woman of strength and resolve, determined to reclaim her agency and her future. Then we fight together, he said finally. But we do it smart, not reckless. Over the next few hours, they planned their approach with Urich's assistance. The droid provided detailed schematics of the genetic control station and outlined potential access points. By the time they were ready to rest, they had a workable plan, dangerous, but not impossible. As they prepared makeshift beds from the limited materials available, Leonara suddenly paused. Nick, she said hesitantly, there's something I need to tell you. He looked up from arranging his bedding. What is it? 7 years ago, during my first cleansing ritual. She took a deep breath. Someone did try to help me. A boy. Not much older than I was. He threw his hammer at one of the overseers when they were being particularly cruel. He was beaten severely for it, and I never saw what happened to him after that. But I never forgot his face. Nick had gone very still. Why are you telling me this? Leonara met his eyes. Because it was you, wasn't it? You were that boy. The silence between them was profound. Finally, Nick nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. I was stationed in the youth barracks overlooking the square, training to become a commando. When I saw what they were doing to you, he shook his head. I acted without thinking. They punished me with solitary confinement for a month, then accelerated my combat training. I think they hoped the intensive regimen would beat the defiance out of me. It didn't work, Leonara observed softly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, it didn't. If anything, it made me more determined. After they released me, I tried to find you, but you had disappeared from the system. I spent the next 7 years looking for you in every corner of Erdan. Today was like destiny. I never thought I'd live to see you again, Leonara whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. To thank the only person who showed kindness during the worst moment of my life. Nick reached out, hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty as she didn't pull away. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. For 7 years, I carried the memory of not doing enough. Today, I finally got the chance to do better. Slowly, inevitably, they drew closer to each other. In the dim light of the cavern, surrounded by danger on all sides, they found a moment of connection that transcended their circumstances. When their lips met, it felt like the culmination of a journey begun 7 years before, a circle finally completed. They slept side by side that night, finding comfort in simple human contact after years of isolation. Whatever challenges awaited them in orbit, they would face them together. Morning in the cavern was signaled only by Urich's internal chronometer. After a sparse breakfast of emergency rations, they set out for the coordinates of the hidden shuttle. The journey through the mining tunnels was arduous, with several sections requiring them to crawl through narrow passages or wade through flooded chambers. By midday, they emerged onto the surface of Chiron for the first time since their escape. The radioactive wasteland stretched before them, a vast expanse of metallic sand dunes that glittered unnaturally under the harsh suns. The air itself seemed to shimmer with radiation, and without the protective gear that Urich led them to in a nearby cache, exposure would have been fatal within hours. The shuttle is located approximately 2.4 kilometers northwest, Urich informed them as they donned the radiation suits. Terrain is unstable. Recommend maintaining proximity to this unit for optimal navigation. They set off across the dunes, each step sinking into the metallic sand. The radiation suits were old and cumbersome, making progress slow and exhausting. Periodically, swirling dust devils of radioactive particles would force them to take cover behind rocky outcroppings. "I grew up hearing stories about the wastelands," Leonara said during one such pause. "My parents said that before the Interstellar War, Aryans could walk these lands without protection. Our bodies had adapted to filter the radiation, even use it to fuel our regenerative abilities." "What happened?" Nick asked, watching another dust devil spin past their shelter. "The governance happened. During the war, they bombed Karen's shield generators, claiming Aryan separatists had taken control of them. Without the planetary shields, solar radiation increased tenfold. Even Aryan physiology couldn't adapt quickly enough." Her expression hardened behind her mask. "It was the first step in their systematic elimination of my people." Nick was silent for a moment, processing this information. "The more I learn about the governance, the more I understand why Alyssa and the Resistance fight so desperately." "And you?" Leonara asked. "What do you fight for now?" He looked at her, his eyes visible through the mask's viewport. "For a future where no one has to crawl for their life, where genetic potential is used for healing, not warfare." He paused, then added more softly, "For a chance to see who we might become in a world without the governance's shadow over us." Their moment was interrupted by Urich's urgent alert. "Movement detected on perimeter scan. Governance patrol units approaching from northeast." They peered cautiously around their cover. In the distance, the unmistakable silhouettes of governance hover tanks moved across the dunes, energy scanners sweeping the terrain before them. "They're searching methodically," Nick observed. "Those are biological signature scanners. They're still tracking your DNA." "Can we go around them?" Leonara asked. Urich calculated briefly. "Negative. Current patrol pattern will intersect with optimal route to shuttle location. Alternative paths increase radiation exposure beyond safe parameters." Nick assessed their options quickly. "We need a diversion." He turned to Urich. "Can you remote access any of the mining facility's remaining systems from here?" The droid's sensor light flickered as it processed the request. "Limited access possible to ventilation system in northern quadrant. Could initiate emergency purge protocol." "Do it," Nick ordered. "Make it look like a life sign." As Urich established the connection, Nick explained to Leonara, "The purge will release a heat signature that mimics human biological patterns. It should draw the patrol away long enough for us to reach the shuttle." Minutes later, they watched as the hover tanks abruptly changed direction, moving rapidly toward the northern mining entrances. As soon as the patrol was out of visual range, they hurried across the open terrain, following Urich's guidance through the least radioactive path. The shuttle, when they finally reached it, was hardly impressive. A battered atmospheric transport that had clearly been retrofitted and repaired multiple times. It was partially buried in the metallic sand, with only its upper hull and cockpit visible. "This is supposed to reach orbit?" Nick asked skeptically, as they worked to uncover the access hatch. "Black sphere resistance technical specifications indicate complete overhaul of propulsion systems," Urich replied. "External appearance maintained deliberately to avoid detection." Once inside, Nick was somewhat reassured. The cockpit controls had indeed been completely modernized, with state-of-the-art navigation and stealth systems. As he familiarized himself with the layout, Leonara and Urich worked to prepare the craft for launch. The governance will detect us as soon as we break atmosphere, Nick warned as he initiated the pre-flight sequence. We'll have minutes at most to approach the station before they scramble interceptors. Leonara strapped herself into the co-pilot seat. Then we'd better make those minutes count. The shuttle's engines came to life with a rumble that belied their power. Nick piloted it skillfully out of its hiding place, keeping low to the dunes to minimize their radar profile. Once clear of the immediate area, he angled the nose upward and pushed the thrusters to maximum. The craft shot into the sky with surprising speed, rattling violently as it broke through the lower atmosphere. Leonara gripped her seat, knuckles white beneath her purple-blue skin, as gravitational forces pressed them back. "Entering upper atmosphere," Nick announced, his military training evident in his calm precision. "Stealth systems engaged. Approaching orbital insertion path." On the view screen, the black void of space gradually replaced Karen's turbulent sky. Stars became visible, and in the near distance, the looming structure of the governance's genetic control station orbited silently. The station resembled a massive wheel, with a central hub connected to an outer ring by 8 evenly spaced spokes. According to the intelligence Alyssa had provided, the genetic databases were housed in the hub, while the ring contained power generation, life support, and defensive systems. "Orbital approach vector calculated," Urich reported from his interface with the shuttle systems. "Recommend docking at Maintenance Airlock 7. Security protocols minimal for essential service functions." Nick adjusted their course accordingly. "How long before they detect us?" As if in answer to his question, warning indicators flashed across the control panel. "Scan detected," Urich announced. "Governance defensive systems have locked onto our profile. Identification protocols initiating." "This is it," Nick said, turning to Leonara. "We'll have one chance at this. Are you ready?" She nodded, her expression resolute. "I was born ready." Nick opened a communication channel to the station. "Genetic Control Station. This is Maintenance Shuttle KR-17 requesting emergency docking. We have detected a critical fault in your external cooling array." There was a tense pause before a response came through. "Shuttle KR-17. We have no scheduled maintenance. Transmit authorization codes immediately, or you will be fired upon." Instead of responding with codes, Nick nodded to Leonara. She leaned toward the communication panel. "This is Leonara Sira, last of the Aryan elite. I surrender myself to governance authority. Genetic verification protocol, Sigma-7. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, biological signature confirmed. Proceed to primary docking bay. Any deviation from approach vector will result in immediate defensive action." Nick closed the channel and exchanged a look with Leonara. "They took the bait." "For now," she agreed. "But once we're aboard, we'll have minutes at most before they realize our true intention." As Nick guided the shuttle toward the main docking bay, they finalized their plan. Urich would remain with the shuttle, maintaining systems for a rapid departure. Nick would escort Leonara to the central hub, using her genetic signature to gain access to the core database. Once there, she would initiate a complete purge of the Phoenix Protocol research, while Nick held off any security response. The docking procedure went smoothly. Too smoothly, Nick thought. As the airlock cycled and they prepared to board the station, he drew his ancient sword. "Remember," he said quietly to Leonara, "they need you alive and undamaged. Me, they'll shoot on sight. Stay behind me until we reach the central hub." The inner airlock door slid open to reveal a reception committee. 4 governance security robots flanking a human officer in the distinctive black uniform of the scientific division. "Leonara Sira," the officer stated, his tone clinical. "You are to be escorted directly to genetic processing. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." His gaze shifted to Nick, narrowing. "Your companion is unauthorized. He will be detained for questioning." Nick stepped forward, positioning himself between Leonara and the welcoming party. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said pleasantly. "I'm not here to be detained." In one fluid motion, he swept his sword in an arc that severed the nearest robot's sensor array before it could react. The other robots immediately activated their defensive protocols, energy weapons emerging from compartments in their chassis. "Run!" Nick shouted to Leonara as he engaged the security forces. His blade flashed in the sterile light of the docking bay, finding weak points in the robot's construction with unerring accuracy. Leonara didn't run. Instead, she pressed her palm against a nearby access panel. The violet glow of her Aryan gift spread across the electronic interface. Alarms blared throughout the station, but the security doors that should have sealed them in the docking bay remained open. "This way," she called to Nick, who was finishing off the last robot. The scientific officer had fled at the first sign of combat, presumably to summon reinforcements. Together, they raced through the corridors of the station, Leonara somehow intuiting the correct path toward the central hub. Whenever they encountered locked doors, she would press her hand to the access panels, her genetic signature overriding security protocols. "How are you doing this?" Nick asked, as they paused at an intersection, checking for pursuit. "Aryan DNA was used to create the station's biometric security," she explained breathlessly. "They never imagined one of us would actually board the station, so they never created safeguards against it. I can feel the systems responding to me. It's like they recognize me as family." They continued their journey inward, occasionally encountering resistance that Nick dispatched with his sword. The ancient weapon proved remarkably effective against the station's defenses, which were designed to counter energy-based threats, not physical ones. Finally, they reached the central hub, a vast circular chamber dominated by a glowing pillar of light that extended from floor to ceiling. Data streams flowed visibly within the pillar, representing the sum total of the governance's genetic research. "The genetic core," Leonara whispered, awe and revulsion mingling in her voice. "All their atrocities, cataloged and stored for future exploitation." She approached the pillar, hand outstretched. As her fingers made contact with the energy field, the entire column pulsed with her distinctive violet hue. Displays around the chamber came to life, recognizing her genetic signature and granting unprecedented access. "I need time," she told Nick. "Minutes at least to find and purge the Phoenix protocol data." "You'll have it," he promised, taking up position at the chamber's entrance. Through the transparent walls, they could see governance forces mobilizing throughout the station. "Whatever happens, don't stop until it's done." Leonara nodded and turned her full attention to the task. Her hands moved through the data field as if conducting an invisible orchestra, sorting through vast quantities of information with intuitive precision. Meanwhile, Nick prepared for the inevitable assault. It came sooner than expected. A squad of elite governance troops, led by none other than High Commander Darian Cruz himself, approached the hub from the main corridor. Cruz was instantly recognizable, a tall, imposing figure with a face bisected by a cybernetic implant that enhanced his combat capabilities. "Nick Velton," Cruz called out, his voice artificially amplified. "The deserter returns. I always knew your sentimentality would be your downfall." Nick stood firm, sword at the ready. "And I always knew your ambition would blind you to humanity. Darian, creating immortal soldiers won't bring back those you lost in the war." Cruz's expression hardened. "This isn't about personal loss. It's about ensuring human dominance across the galaxy. The Phoenix Protocol will create the perfect defense force. Incorruptible, undying, loyal." "Slaves, you mean," Nick countered. "Beings created solely to fight your wars." "A necessary evolution," Cruz dismissed. "Now stand aside. The Aryan belongs to the governance." "She belongs to herself," Nick replied, and attacked. What followed was a battle unlike any Nick had fought before. Cruz's cybernetic enhancements made him unnaturally fast and strong, while the troops accompanying him formed a perimeter, energy weapons at the ready, but unable to fire for fear of damaging the genetic core. Nick fought with everything he had, his ancient sword meeting Cruz's energy blade in a shower of sparks. Each clash sent reverberations through the chamber, but Nick held his ground, preventing any approach to Leonara as she continued her work. Behind him, the data pillar was changing color, sections of it darkening as Leonara systematically corrupted and deleted the Phoenix Protocol research. Cruz, seeing his life's work being destroyed before his eyes, fought with increasing desperation. "It's too late," Nick taunted as he parried another vicious strike. "The Phoenix is dying before it can rise." With a roar of rage, Cruz broke through Nick's defense, his energy blade slicing across Nick's chest. The wound wasn't deep, but it was enough to drive Nick to his knees. Cruz advanced on Leonara, who remained focused on the data field despite the battle raging behind her. "Step away from the core," he commanded. "Your genetic material is governance property." Leonara turned to face him, her hands still immersed in the data stream. "My genetics are my own," she said calmly, "and I choose to use them for this." With a final gesture, she completed her task. Throughout the pillar, the last sections of the Phoenix Protocol data vanished, replaced by cascading error messages. Emergency alarms activated as the system attempted to recover the lost information, only to find it irretrievably corrupted. "What have you done?" Cruz demanded, his voice breaking with disbelief. "I've freed my people," Leonara answered. "Those who are gone and those yet to be born." Cruz lunged at her in blind fury, but Nick, summoning his last reserves of strength, intercepted the attack. Their blades locked, energy against steel, as the station shuddered around them. "Leonara, go!" Nick shouted. "Get back to the shuttle!" Instead of fleeing, Leonara placed her hand on Nick's shoulder. The now familiar violet glow spread from her palm, flowing into his wound and through his entire body. Strength returned to his limbs. The pain, fading as her Aryan gift, accelerated his healing. Renewed, Nick broke the blade lock and drove Cruz back with a series of powerful strikes. The High Commander, realizing his disadvantage, signaled his troops to open fire despite the risk to the core. Energy blasts tore through the chamber as Nick and Leonara took cover behind the data pillar. The shots that hit the pillar caused cascading failures throughout the system, accelerating the destruction that Leonara had initiated. "We need to leave now," Nick urged. "This whole place is becoming unstable." They made a break for the exit, Nick deflecting energy blasts with his sword, while Leonara used her connection to the station systems to seal doors behind them, delaying pursuit. Their retreat to the docking bay was a chaotic blur of alarms, emergency lighting, and intermittent combat. When they finally reached the shuttle, Urich had already prepared for immediate departure. "Station power grid critical," the droid reported as they boarded. "Estimated time to catastrophic failure, 3 minutes, 17 seconds. Nick took the controls, disengaging from the docking clamps and steering the shuttle away from the deteriorating station as quickly as the engines would allow. Behind them, explosions blossomed along the station's outer ring as power conduits overloaded. They had barely reached a safe distance when the central hub, housing the genetic core, erupted in a spectacular detonation. The shockwave buffeted their small craft, but Nick's piloting kept them stable. The station's destruction lit up Charon's orbit like a new sun, visible even from the planet's surface. As they began their descent back to Chiron, Leonara sat in exhausted silence, watching the remains of the station burn up in the atmosphere. Years of research, countless atrocities committed in the name of genetic perfection, all of it reduced to falling stars across Chiron's sky. "It's really over," she murmured, half to herself. "The Phoenix Protocol is finished." Nick engaged the autopilot and moved to sit beside her. "One battle won," he cautioned. "The governance still controls Chiron." "But not for long," she replied, a new determination in her voice. "What we did today wasn't just about destroying research. It was a signal, proof that the governance isn't invincible. She was right. As they re-entered the atmosphere, Uruk reported multiple uprisings across Urdan and other Karen settlements. The destruction of the orbital station had been witnessed planet-wide, and the resistance had seized the moment to launch coordinated attacks against governance strongholds. They landed not in the radioactive wastelands, but on the outskirts of Urdan itself, where Alyssa Thorne and a contingent of Black Sphere fighters met them. The judge-turned-revolutionary looked tired, but triumphant. "You succeeded beyond our wildest hopes," she told them, as they disembarked. "The genetic core destroyed, and with it, the heart of the governance's power on Karen." Reports came in continuously of governance forces retreating, abandoning outposts as the population rose against them. Without the promise of the Phoenix Protocol to bolster their resolve, the governance's hold on Karen was crumbling. In the days that followed, Leonara and Nick remained at the center of the revolution, their story spreading across the planet as a symbol of defiance and hope. The public court, once a place of humiliation and death, became the gathering point for celebrations as governance buildings were reclaimed one by one. 2 weeks after the destruction of the orbital station, they stood together on a balcony overlooking what had once been the cleansing ritual square. Below them, citizens of all backgrounds worked together to dismantle the overseer's platform and erect a memorial to those who had suffered under governance rule. "What happens now?" Nick asked, watching the activity below. "After the revolution, I mean." Leonara leaned against the balcony rail, her gaze on the horizon, where the remains of the genetic station still occasionally streaked across the sky as debris re-entered the atmosphere. "Healing," she said simply. "For Chiron, for its people, for the memory of the Aryans. My genetic gift was always meant for healing, not war. Perhaps that's what I can offer to this new world we're building." Nick looked at her profile, struck by how much she had changed from the broken woman he'd rescued from the public court. Strength and purpose had replaced fear and resignation. "And us?" he asked quietly. "What happens to us?" She turned to face him, a smile softening her features. "I think we've earned the right to find out, don't you?" She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "7 years ago, you were the only one who saw me as a person worth saving. Today, you're still seeing me, not my genes, not my potential as a weapon or a cure. Just me." "That's all I've ever wanted," Nick admitted. "To see clearly and act accordingly." As the suns began to set over Urdan, casting long shadows across the square where their journey together had begun, Leonara leaned forward and kissed him. Not the desperate connection of fugitives facing death, but the tender promise of survivors facing life. In the distance, the Black Sphere resistance flag flew from what had once been the governance headquarters. Across Chiron, the news spread. The age of genetic exploitation was over. A new dawn was rising, one where Aryan gifts would heal rather than harm, where ancient swords could still overcome modern tyranny, and where a woman once forced to crawl could stand tall beside the man who had seen her humanity when no one else would. Together, they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky, no longer threatened by orbiting stations or Phoenix protocols, but full of possibilities as vast and numerous as the points of light above. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them as they had faced the governance, with courage, determination, and the unshakable belief that every being deserved dignity and freedom. The journey ahead would not be easy. Rebuilding a world shattered by oppression never was. But as they stood on that balcony, hands clasped and hearts aligned, they knew with absolute certainty that they had already overcome the hardest part. They had found each other, and in doing so, found the strength to change their world forever.